And we're live. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the stream. This is Actuali podcast. We've been doing this ongoing series, covering Awakening from the Meaning Crisis by John Vervaeke. Welcome all. It's another watch party episode for episode 48. So, we're live on Twitch. We're live on YouTube. We are live on Facebook. You can watch us wherever you like, and you can always hear these full episodes after the fact. Go to anchor.fm/actuali for links to all the places, Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, all of the podcast networks. We are on it. So you can find links to all those places, or you can just Google Actuali podcast. So here we are.
Hey, and I'll be in the comments tonight, so if any of our subscribers are in there.
And the YouTube side of things? YouTube?
Yep.
Right on. Cool.
Yeah, everything seems to be working.
Sweet.
I'm going to keep my
we'll
count
try and
down.
keep track. I'll watch the Twitch and the Facebook. Yeah, thank you guys for joining us, and for all those of you that have been hanging with us through this entire series, thank you so much. It's been 47 episodes so far. Tonight we are covering episode 48 of John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis on Corbin and the Divine Double. And let me actually just do a quick share up on the socials.
Well, we're in the home stretch, guys. I think
That's
it's
right.
like 3 episodes till the end.
Yes.
I won't say I'm looking forward to the end, but it feels like an accomplishment.
I'm really looking forward to what comes after.
Yeah.
We're going to be setting up a new studio. We're going to be covering, everything that comes after Awakening. And Vervaeke, out there, he alone has had some amazing conversations since this series was released with people like Jordan Peterson, Jonathan Pajot, Daniel Schmachtenberger, Ian McGilchrist, among others. And so we'll probably cover some of those. We'll probably look at some of his other new series. I know he's releasing Solutions to the Meaning Crisis lecture series. I know that he also has his After Socrates series. And I mean, there's just in this area of covering the meaning crisis and how we may awaken from it, there's a lot more people besides John Vervaeke that we can look at, like Jordan Hall and Brandon Graham Dempsey and other people like that. So I'm really excited to explore further outside this initial area that we have covered thus far.
This is the primer for all the rest,
That's right. And this has been something of a boot camp for ourselves, too. We were just talking about that. It's going to be amazing to finally finish this series and get into the new studio and see what happens, guys. Stay tuned, because now we're going to be free to just really look at whatever comes to mind, whatever we see that week, or something that we could have watched 8 months ago that we just remembered that was just particularly compelling. We'll be able to cover whatever we want, and we're going to go deep.
Yeah, and looking at things from the perspective of where we are now, instead of just being like, this thing happened, aren't you angry? It's like, okay, this thing happened. What does it mean? What are the responses that any of sides of whatever argument are going to have? Where do those responses come from? How do we have those responses and then have the wherewithal to step back and look at them? Because if you watch the news, but if you pay attention to current events, like really pay attention, yeah, you're going to be angry, you're going to be responsive, it's going to get you, and rightly so. There's a lot of things to be angry about, but what we've been talking about and studying through this is why your brain has those responses and what can you do to ameliorate the negative responses and optimize the better responses. So you can have a better relationship with who you are, where you are.
Amen to that.
Because sometimes you can't really do nothing about where you are, so then you can focus on the who you are and why, and then manifest and change the where you are, whether physically or emotionally or spiritually or intellectually. All the Lees.
Yes. How to return to the being mode and be there more consistently in our lives. We are so caught up in that having mode, trying to acquire things to distract ourselves from our thoughts, from our minds,
Not
from
necessarily
the world around us.
caught up in the having mode, but not using the having mode for what it's supposed to be used for. We're in a modal confusion. We're
Absolutely, right.
confusing the having mode for the being mode when so it's like trying to fulfill what we need to be with the need to have, which having is important because you need to have water to keep from dying of thirst. I get it, but when all that is satiated, your hunger, your thirst is satiated, where are you left at? Are you still fighting for the having in the instant mode, or are you participating in the being mode? Stepping out of the palace, to reference earlier episodes about Prince Siddhartha and what he had to do. The palace being the having mode.
Every one of his having mode needs were met, but his being mode had not even been explored. And once he realized that there was a being mode,
didn't even know that there was a being mode. Yeah, that's the trip right there.
That's right. So on our last episode, let me pull us onto this other screen here, guys.
Got some notes.
We got some notes from Mark Mulvey, who took notes on the entire Awakening series. And our last episode was episode 47 on Heidegger. And he highlights one of John Vervaeke's quotes from each episode. And here's one. Understanding being, or the ground of being, as a supreme being is the deep forgetfulness that has us existentially adrift in modal confusion, fundamentally misframing our relationship into being, and therefore being subject to a disconnectedness from realness, which is at the heart of the meaning crisis. What he's saying there, understanding being, or the ground of being, as a supreme being, is to separate ourselves from it. It's to think in the two worlds.
Well, there's this self,
Cartesian,
and then there is that thing.
Duality,
right?
yeah. So there's, in classical Christianity, for instance, Christ dwelleth in you. He lives through us. God's love is perfected through us. There was an understanding that God is one with all things, and transcends it all, and that would be more like panentheism.
And to use the language of this series, the God, the Almighty thing, is actually not a thing because it is of no thingness. Not nothingness, but no thing. It is not a thing.
It is not any one thing. So, that's right. It is beyond things. It's the creative force behind all things, and it's suffused through all things. It's it's everywhere, and it's beyond at once.
So I guess
if we look at it from a panentheistic perspective,
I guess what is being said here is
we confused it, and we started thinking
by calling something the supreme, we're putting a box of supreme around it. And as we've been learning through this
and there can't
series,
be any one supreme.
And there is no any one box either. The boxes always expand. The framings always expand.
It's the source. Yeah. Call it God.
And it's not separate from you.
Is infinite, is limitless.
Yeah.
And to confine it and say that there's this supreme being up there that is separate from us puts us into this dualistic framework. And we end up fighting over our versions of God rather than recognizing that this transcendent source transcends all definition. It is the source of all things, and it is infinite. It cannot be described. It cannot be contained in any one ideological interpretation. It's beyond all of that.
There was and I'm going to butcher the saying, so I'm going to paraphrase it, but there was a Hindu description of this relationship of ourselves with the quote-unquote supreme. We are the lotus petal toes or toenails of God. So the idea is you and yourself, all that makes you is that. Now you yourself are not all of that, but all of what makes you is that.
Yes.
And I use that
and you are intrinsically interconnected with that.
Yeah.
But of course, in our particular mode, we are in an individual.
Well, how do I have that experience?
That's
how do
right.
I have that experience?
And that's where Heidegger was trying to get at, was saying that metaphysics throughout history seems to have made a mistake.
And he felt
somewhere along the way where it started to think of things in separate terms and dualistic You know,
Well,
that there's a supreme being and then there's us
I
kinds of
think
terminology.
also is, you know, he like his interpretation was as far objective as you could possibly put the objective standard. There's a problem with that though. We're not objective creatures. We're inherently subjective creatures.
Yeah,
Trying
here.
as hard as we can to get an objective look at life.
Yes, yes. And here's a great paragraph on that from Mark's notes. Central to Heidegger's work is his notion of Dasein, being there. This refers to our being. Notice that this is an inheritance from Christian tradition, that we are in the image of God. As Heidegger is suggesting that by questing into our being, we will get a deeper understanding of being itself. Why? Because for Heidegger, our being is the being whose being is in question. Sounds confusing, but hear it this way. We are the type of being who actually questions who and what we are in a way that makes a difference to who and what we are.
Yeah, and I don't think he was I don't think he was wrong in that.
No, that point.
As far as that point goes.
So he's attempting to respond to the meaning crisis.
Yeah, and you know that, like, I would say that idea is the trailhead depiction of the trails in its off branches. And maybe, like, you know, in his case, because he did fall prey to some very sick ideology, maybe it was the map that he was looking at wasn't as accurate as he thought it was, or he couldn't see far enough down the path.
He himself, his
yeah.
ego was, it was
Because
weak to
Heidegger
that temptation.
became a party member of the Nazi Party, even though, you know, he was trying to think how to free yourself of those types of shortfallings. But
And Tillich, who studied Heidegger and carried out Heidegger's work even further in his own way, was a Jew who escaped the Nazis.
was that Tillich?
I believe that was Tillich,
Yeah, I think
on
that was
Being,
Tillich.
who wrote On Being.
Yeah, so it's like, you know, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
You know, sometimes you have to separate what the intellect who came up with something became to try to figure out what they're getting at, whether what they're getting at is worthwhile or not. You know, because sometimes it's worthwhile, and I think some of these ideas very well may have been very worthwhile, but, you know, like, you know, say you take like Marx. Yeah, I get what he was going at. I just don't think it was worthwhile. Same thing with Hegel. You know, yes, I get what he was trying to get at, but I don't think it was worthwhile. But only separating, you know, say the individual from what they were getting at, I've been able to look at what they were getting at to be like, okay, I see what you're getting at, and then make a judgment of whether it's working or not, or has worked or not. That's the nice thing about history is we've got stories about things that have happened in the past, and you can be like, okay, well, you know, it didn't work. I see where you're getting at, but I think you came to a wrong conclusion, whether it be foolishness or intentionally coming to the wrong conclusion. What is it? You know, understanding the material and reasoning wrong, which is foolishness, and then there's not understanding the material. I think that, you know, a lot of people understand the material and reason wrong. Doesn't mean I shouldn't read it and try to figure out what the hell they're talking about.
Right.
You know,
Right.
for good or for bad, you know. And, you know, history is just a story. It's very, you know, ongoing and accurate in some cases, an inaccurate story, but it's still a story nonetheless.
Yes, yes. So the Kantian thing in itself, that was an interesting point, can be replaced by this new notion as the thing beyond itself, which Vervaeke is putting forth here. Everything is both shining into our subjectivity, so everything in our awareness shines forth with salience, stands out to us in a subjective way. We're always feeling things subjectively, but it's also withdrawing beyond our capacity to frame it at the same time.
So the more we see and experience, the further the horizon gets away from us.
Yes, any subject or object that you look at can be interpreted ad infinitum, just on and on and on out into forever. So that horizon is constantly withdrawing from us, just as it is simultaneously shining forth to us. And both of these aspects contribute to the realness of an object or an experience.
And it's what makes it really real. In reference, he was talking about, like, you know, like a good open-ended sandbox game or VR game, you know. um, if you want this feeling, it has to always open up itself past the boundary of what you can see and experience, as well as shining in to your subjective experience, everything that is from it. Like a good sandbox game is really, really good in the beginning because you haven't yet seen the horizon, and what's shining in is salient enough for you to have a vivid and
Novel experience, right?
yeah, and as well as something like deep within you. Like, the first time you played Morrowind or Oblivion, the first time is like it grips you in, and you haven't yet seen the horizon of how far you can go on the map limits, or how far you can go with like min-maxing something.
Or the first time you saw Lord of the Rings, you don't know exactly where the story's going yet, or how they're going to depict it.
So
so that sense of wonder is quite alive.
In those moments of when you're still early with the material, you get that open very realness. And a good story or a good game or a good movie is something you can watch over and over and over again, or read over and over again, and still get that feeling.
It still evokes that sense of wonder, and that's
which is
something
both subjective
sacred
and objective at the same time. This interplay of being outside the book, reading it, knowing that you're outside of that book, but it keeps revealing to you and retreating away from you and hiding little secrets from you as you read.
It's like the creators have to have come from a place of wonder when they created that scene, or that game, that movie, that piece of art, and then you can in turn experience that. Interesting there. So let's go back to the dual screen here and look at this section. So Mark Mulvey notes, returning to the being mode versus the having mode. So now we're talking about returning to beingness. There is a tradition of God being understood as the supreme being, i.e., from the having mode perspective, as being a being that grounds and makes all other beings. So it's like the separate creator, old guy in the sky that judges and makes. And this is a fundamental mistake according to Heidegger, known as the problem of ontotheology. And, this is the way that we started reinterpreting Christianity in the more recent centuries versus how it was when it was originally created. And so trying to understand being theologically as a supreme being, we're trying to do this. And Heidegger says that there's a deep connection between this understanding of being in terms of the supreme being or God and nihilism. In some ways, this is Heidegger trying to articulate Nietzsche, who was a big influence on him. So understanding being, or the ground of being as a supreme being, ontotheology, is the deep forgetfulness that has us existentially adrift in modal confusion. Back to the original quote, fundamentally misframing our relationship to being, and therefore being subject to a disconnectedness from realness, from the reality of the situation of life we find ourselves in, which is at the heart of the meaning crisis. We think of ourselves as separate from this planet, as separate from one another, as separate from our ideas of God, and then our ideas of God are fighting over each other, or fighting against each other for which version is the best.
And when it comes down to, the personal human level, it's like now we see ourselves so separate that we are some parasite.
Right. Yes. Oh, yeah. And we've talked about this before, like this idea that humans are a cancer, and then that gets popular, and people recycle that rhetoric, and they push it out on social media.
Let's go further back to like
somebody said it and it sounded clever. I can relate to that too, but we're forgetting that we are.
What's better, cancer or stewardship? I'd rather look at us as stewards than
we also have and
that's responsibility. Cancer just cancers.
We have this beautiful potential to be also stewards of our environments, and there's such a mix of humanity out there. I think for the most part, we seem mostly good, but the bad apples certainly pollute the perception of the whole bunch.
Well, the nature of the apple is to rot, and if you put them all together in one basket and you don't do things to keep them from rotting, they're going to rot.
An apple doesn't exist without an apple tree. An apple tree doesn't exist without soil, without earth, without the sun. Which is the
rot of something else.
Without the cosmos. all things are actually one. We are intrinsically interconnected with everything and everyone around us. We're trading atoms as we speak here with the chair, with each other. Yeah. So all of that is what's actually happening underneath. We are outgrowths of this planet. We are like the thinking aspect of the universe that has come into reality. And perhaps that is what a universe ultimately
Or
can do on its
perhaps,
highest level, is to create thinking,
well,
self-reflective
perhaps
extensions of itself.
perhaps the quality of the universe that thinks subjectively.
Mm.
You know, because if we're to talk about, you know, God, that is the thing that is both subjective and objective completely. We can fantasize or
Hypothesize.
or imagine, create an image of something that would be like enough of the objective that we can strive towards it, but never will we attain that. We are not that side of the thinking universe.
We can never say that ours is the one and only, and this is what it's exactly precisely what it's like, because if we're honest with ourselves, we know that if there is a God, then it would be naturally limitless. It would be the Alpha and the Omega. It would be omnipresent.
Our fingers aren't wide enough to point directly at all of it, but we can point to points of it.
Yes, and that's
know?
that's the best that we can do. So as long as we, in all of our various religions and wisdom traditions and cultures, can see Source or God as something ultimately transcendent,
And
then
not separate either. That's the thing, is it's not a separate.
not separate.
It's a relationship. A relationship is
something that can be known so deeply in every moment, through every person we meet, through every place that we visit, and every event that we interact with. We can always get to know the source of this reality more, but we'll never get to the end of it.
And as it should be, it'd be terribly boring if we knew that there was an end to that horizon that is always going away from us. It wouldn't be real anymore. Now, would it be if it had an end?
Yeah.
As far as what we're talking about in this series goes, you know, we could be wrong. We could be interpreting what Vervaeke's saying wrong, or Vervaeke could be wrong. And all the people who've been talking about this for eons could be wrong as well. Could be. But might as well look into it, understand why we're talking about it. What are they getting at? What's being got at?
Yeah.
Questioning the being that is, you know, your being, which is the very being that is in question. So basically, with Heidegger becoming a Nazi versus Tillich like getting out and being like, I gotta leave because, you know, they had the thing. The issue with Heidegger is the confusion of expertise with wisdom, right? Mm-hmm. He was an expert in this and thinking this, but he didn't have the wisdom to realize how wrong he could be.
Right. Heidegger seemed to have...
He may be reasoning right, but coming to the wrong interpretation.
His self-congratulatory nature shows that he comes from he has a superiority complex, and that was something that was in Germany at that time in the Nazi movement, and that seems to relate to his participation with them later in his life.
Yeah.
Whereas Tillich was the first non-Jewish academic to be persecuted by the Nazis because he opposed them and resisted them from the very start. But Tillich did carry on Heidegger's work relating to our misunderstanding of the use of supreme being interchangeably with God.
Opposed to being a separate,
the transcendent source,
separate idol.
Yeah.
It
is idolatry, though. That's right.
It is what we would see in perspective as the point of where we're going towards. Like, you know, if you look at your path, you can see either edge of the path on your periphery, and then you look out of the path, you see a single point. That point will continually reveal itself and go further away from you.
Yeah.
So we'll call that point the supreme being, if you will. But as we move towards it, is constantly opening up and retreating away. That's this relationship of opening and retreating and opening and retreating.
Seeming to retreat. It's just that it's constantly
opposed
productive.
to seeing that point as this separate thing that eventually you can get there and you can get it in your hand.
Right. Yeah.
Because that is the idol. You can hold an idol or you can hold an icon. The idol is something you worship. The icon reminds you of what you're worshiping. Mm-hmm. I've been listening to some Orthodox people talking
but to confuse our ideas with the actual nature of God.
I've had an issue with that, actually. Like, you know, it's like, well, why do you have like the saints lined up there and all this stuff? Like, isn't that, idol worship? And then, you know, as I'm
it's not supposed to be
it's a reminder for what you're remembering. And like, if you're doing certain prayers, who or what you're praying to and what you're what you were doing.
We know that the icon is not an actual accurate representation
opposed
of
to
what
the
it
idol
stands for.
is the object.
It's to point to that undefinable.
Well, you don't worship the wood and you don't worship the paint. Even though you'll hold a certain reverence for the process of carving the wood itself, and the paint and the action to make it happen, you don't worship that. That reminds you what you worship. So
It's
that
confusing.
relationship,
It's
right?
confusing the finger pointing at the moon with the moon.
With the moon,
You know?
yeah.
Yeah.
You know, a little bit of Bruce Lee up in there.
Right.
Yo, you look at the finger, you'll miss all the heavenly glory. Oh, Bruce.
Heavenly glory.
Even kung fu movies were talking about stuff like this. Come on, man.
Bruce
We've
Lee
been doing it
studied
for
a lot of Jiddu-Krishnamurti, man. He did his
I bet.
homework.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's quite the philosopher.
Interesting fellow. Well,
Yeah, look back on and there's an old episode of Actuali podcast where I cover Bruce Lee and his interest in Jiddu-Krishnamurti, and we actually listened to some Bruce Lee talking.
well, he was a man that was like, you know, if he was confronted with something that seemed to work, that challenged what he was doing, he learned how to do it. You know, Chuck Norris kicked him in the face, and then he had Chuck Norris teach him what that was that he kicked him in the face with.
Right. Yeah.
Bruce Lee
he
came
could
across,
incorporate it,
you know,
right.
the bodybuilders that were all big, and was like, "What is that? How do you do that? How do you make your muscles do that?"
How you do
Figured
that,
it
man?
out.
How you do
like
that?
the stuntman, I forget what movie it was, but you know, depicting Bruce Lee's thing, and he got in a fight with the stuntman and whatever, and the stuntman was just putting wrestling moves on him.
Ah,
They actually became friends, and he learned what
he
that
wanted to learn,
was
yeah.
and how to do that.
And
Instead
this
of
is
being
how
like,
he began to
"No,
develop Jeet Kune Do, so his own mixed martial arts
yeah,
style, yeah,
yeah.
which inspired
And it
a lot of
wasn't
mixed martial arts after, right?
And it wasn't picking and choosing. It was
Very cool.
looking for what becomes apparent.
Yes.
To
Yes.
you,
What
you
is
know,
useful in
reveals
the
itself
moment,
to
you know, the
you.
more that I can know of different styles, the more I have accessible for any given moment.
And when
to-
it comes to martial arts and kung fu, sometimes that's a kick to the face by a bearded man that's like, "Hey, Chuck Norris.
Yes.
How much wood could a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could Chuck
Chuck
Norris?"
was a badass, man. All right, fam.
Yeah,
so
we're gonna get it.
We're gonna jump on in here. It's episode 48 of John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. If you have been enjoying this series, make sure that you go over to John's page here on YouTube and give him some love. Check the description under this video for links to the entire Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series, as well as John's channel, and a link to this actual episode that we're watching. And if you are enjoying what we're doing here, make sure to smash that like and subscribe. Throw it on a comment with any thoughts or questions that you may have. That helps the algorithm out more than anything. We'd love to hear from you guys and hear what you have to say, or help perhaps provide understanding on any question. So yeah, this is it.
Welcome back to Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. So last time we were pursuing in depth, trying to understand Heidegger's work as a prophet in the Old Testament sense of the meaning crisis. We took a look at this notion of the thing beyond itself and realness as simultaneously the shining into our framing and the withdrawing beyond our framing in a deeply interpenetrating manner. We took a look at this deeper notion of truth, not truth as correctness, but truth as aletheia, that which grounds the agent-arena relationship in attunement and allows us the potential to remember being by getting into an attunement with its simultaneous disclosure and withdrawal. But we can forget that. We can get into a profound kind of modal confusion, and this is the history of metaphysics as the emergence of nihilism. We can forget the being mode. We can get trapped into the having mode, in which the metaphysics is a propositional project of trying to just use truth as correctness. And we misunderstand being as a particular being. We try to capture the unlimitedness, right, aspect of being, but we only do it at the limit, which Heidegger is deeply critical of. And so we understand being in terms of a supreme being, a being at the limit and beyond the limit. This is ontotheology. We understand God as the supreme being. And this is deeply enmeshed for Heidegger with nihilism, because this ontotheology, this theological way, at least a version of theology from sort of classical traditional theism, right? This way of understanding being gets us into the deep forgetfulness and modal confusion that is the hallmark of nihilism. But of course, we could perhaps remember the being mode, and this is what Corbin, following Heidegger, talks about as gnosis. We can understand what this gnosis is, what does it look like, what would it be like to remember from the being mode through aletheia being. So I want to pick up on this idea of gnosis as serious play, and in a particular piece of work by Heidegger. Heidegger discusses, and this Avens discusses this in his book, and Caputo also discusses this in his excellent book, The Mystical Element in Heidegger's Thought. So both Avens and Caputo talk about this. Heidegger's commentary on the poetry of Angelus Seleucus. Angelus Seleucus was a poet who was basically trying to put into poetry, and we can sort of think of, or at least foresee some things Barfield's going to say. He's trying to put into poetry the work of Meister Eckhart, who was one of the great Neoplatonic mystics within the Rhineland mystics that I talked about so long ago. Now, what's important, of course, for Meister Eckhart and this discussion of gnosis as the remembering through aletheia of the being mode that alleviates the forgetfulness, alleviates nihilism, right, is that Eckhart, of course, is also experiencing this as a form of sacredness, as something that is appropriate to a religious context. So, we also noted in conjunction with that Tillich is going to be deeply influenced by Heidegger's critique of ontotheology, but he's also going to situate it within, although he's going to radically revise what this means, a traditional religious term, which is idolatry. Now let's think about Heidegger's commentary on this poem. So what's the poem? Here's the poem. What's in translation? So unfortunately you lose some of the poetry. The rose is without why. It blooms because it blooms. It cares not for itself, asks not if it is seen. Right? So it's interesting that when Heidegger is doing this, he's actually talking about this word, physis, the Greek word, which of course is the core of the word physics, which again, right, he's trying to get back to a re-experience of the physical as the important way of remembering the being mode. This is again why I think many people misunderstand, and I've argued this elsewhere, and I'm going to keep coming back to it, the response to the meaning crisis is somehow a rejection of physicalism and the physical. Heidegger is instead trying to show you how it can more deeply be remembered. Now he's picking up on the Greek for this term. So again, he's doing some etymological work here. Physis means, right, blossoming forth from itself, springing forth from itself. Right? Very much like the rose is being described. Right? And think about what this means. This is what Heidegger says. The blossoming of the rose is grounded in itself. Has its ground in itself. The blossoming is a pure emerging out of itself, pure shining. Now, what's going on there? Now, of course, Heidegger will never talk just about this shining. Even though he doesn't explicitly mention it here, it's implied, and we should therefore remember it in the phrase emerging out of itself, that the shining is simultaneously withdrawing. We get a sense of the depth of the rose in its physis, because as it shines in a way that's showing that it's shining out of itself, shining out of its depth, shining out of that into which it withdraws as it presents itself to our phenomenological experience. So here Heidegger is, right, he's picking up on one of Eckhart's maxims. This is what Eckhart said: live without why. Right? Or you could also translate it as live without a why. Now that sounds to some people like, what? That sounds like a meaningless existence. There's no why, there's no purpose, there's no grand unifying purpose. Right? But think about it a little bit more carefully, right? Is that quest for the grand culminating purpose, is that maybe perhaps coming from the having mode and not from the being mode? Eckhart is not proposing meaninglessness. He's actually proposing a non-teleological way of being. A non-teleological way of being. It's to move beyond. There's no narrative to the rose. The rose is, right? It's not that, it's sort of lacking. It's beyond, above and beyond the narrative, right? So a way of thinking about this, and I promised to come back to this earlier in the series, and I'll come back to it now, right? Right? And we talked about this in a couple places. We talked about it back with the Stoics, and we talked about when I was talking about perhaps we can't get back to a narrative in the sense of a teleological aspect to physis, to the physical universe. But maybe the universe as a whole is like the rose. Maybe it's blooming from itself, grounded in itself, blossoming, shining from itself while always withdrawing. And think about how that actually comports with, the physics of an ever-expanding universe coming out of the Big Bang, but grounded in the quantum. Is that so foreign a way of talking about the universe that it's very much like the rose, and we get better at being connected to its physis if we drop the axial age requirement that there be a teleological narrative to it all? Right? This horizontal narrative, look, it's important. The horizontal narrative gives us practice in something. It gives us important practice in something. Right? We're going to come back to this. You see, the thing about narrative is narrative gives you deep practice, cognitive existential practice in non-logical identity. We've talked about this and the relationship, right, it has to the symbol. So let's talk about it first of all in the symbol. Remember, here's a framing, and then you transframe, and then there's a non-logical identity between the world inside the frame and the world outside the frame, and a non-logical identity between you here and you there. Remember this non-logical identity between who you are inside this frame and who you are after, right, a transframing. Remember that when we talk about aspiration. Remember that. Now the thing about narrative is that narrative is a way of representing through time, symbolically. We can often, now sometimes we're just talking about a kind of transformation through time, but one of the things that narrative does is through time, it represents how you have a non-logical identity to yourself. Look, I was born in Hamilton in 1961. I'm not in Hamilton now. I'm not, 9 pounds. I'm 190 pounds. That kid that was born in Hamilton can't speak English. Couldn't walk, couldn't move around, certainly couldn't teach this. That kid is in so many ways different, non-identical from me. But in another sense, it's me. And I'm him. Right? Narrative is a way of tracing out and training us in being able to work with non-logical identity, to work with this kind of fundamental transformation. But what we can do, what I think Eckhart is pointing to, is we can exact that ability. for non-logical identity. We can exact that symbolic identity, and instead of thinking of it as unfolding narratively across time, remember how the Stoics criticized this. Stop pursuing fame and glory and wealth and power. Instead of the horizontal narrative, we can do the vertical ontology. We can do the vertical ontology, in which we are connecting the depths of ourselves to the depths of being in a non-teleological being mode. This is, I think, is what Heidegger is pointing to and what Eckhart is pointing to. So, as I mentioned, the pure shining, let's put this on here. Here's the pure shining, the way the rose shines, phenomenon, experience, right? I think that's shining. I think we can talk about it as relevance realization, the salience landscaping into intelligibility. Salience landscaping into intelligibility. What about the pure withdrawal? Right? This is the independent inexhaustibleness of a combinatorially explosive reality. Right? Independent because it is inexhaustible. We cannot drink it dry. The Tao Te Ching, right? And the Tao is a way of understanding physis, the way Heidegger is talking about, right? Look at the book Heidegger and Asian Thought, or Heidegger's Secret Sources, where it talks about the connection to Taoism. He might have been directly influenced by it, right? And the Tao Te Ching talks about, how the Tao is a well that is never used up. It is inexhaustible. It is the inexhaustible mother, right? So the independent inexhaustibleness. Of a combinatorially explosive reality. The thing and the things beyond themselves. Right. I think we can draw these two together, as I've already argued, into this. I want to say this very carefully, right? We can see this, right? We can experience this from within the being mode in the following way. A trajectory of transframing that is always closing upon the relevant while always opening to the moreness. It's a trajectory of transframing that is always closing upon the relevant as it is simultaneously always opening to the moreness. When we recognize that, aletheia, remember it from within the being mode so that we can accentuate it and celebrate it, that's what I've argued sacredness is. And that seems to line up very well with what Eckhart is saying. Now, one of the things I have about Heidegger is he's reticent to talk about this in terms of sacredness. Tillich isn't. Heidegger is, and that's part of why I think he goes astray in certain ways.
Yo, what's up, guys? All right, so break time. Let's rehash everything that we just went through there. To understand God as a supreme being rather than unlimited beingness is the subject of our inquiry. What would it be to know being from the being mode itself? So this mystery of beingness that we conscious, aware humans can experience from the being mode itself, can we explore it from that? And then we look at a poem by Seleucus highlighting how Tillich relates Heidegger's thoughts on idolatry and revises them. In this context, we're looking at this poem. The rose is without why. It blooms because it blooms. It cares not for itself, asks not if it is seen.
So what is that saying right there? You know, the blooming of the blooming of the rose is just for, well, let's break it down to a rose. A rose, it's providing a function for itself, purely of its function.
Mm-hmm.
Now, go a little further in the biology. Yes, it's to be seen by the thing coming at it, you know, to pollinate and do all that stuff. But beyond that, it's not about the seeing. It's not like, oh, there needs to be this rose that blooms so we can observe its beauty. And no, it's just from the ground up.
It's described by
doing.
the very function, by its very nature.
Yeah. And yeah.
It springs forth from itself. The blossoming of the rose is grounded in itself. It's a pure emerging out of itself, a pure shining. And so we look at this term phusis, which is...
Or phoesis.
Is Phusis. Core, and this is a core of the word physics. So phusis, springing forth from itself. Heidegger uses this term to describe getting back to a sense of the physical nature of reality from the being mode, to experience how reality shines forth from itself, how it blooms just like the rose. The shining, it's simultaneously also withdrawing, meaning that it is shining out of a depth that is so constantly creative, it's so constantly unfolding that it is ever unreachable. A pure definition is ever unreachable. So we are suggested now, and I believe this is where we get to Tillich, to live without a why, or live without why.
So before we get to that, so the rose blossoming, the blossoming of the rose having the ground in itself.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the thing it comes from blossoming out. So it has the ground in itself. The blossoming of the rose has the characteristics and everything leading up to itself, for itself to blossom. So it's not just the blossom of the rose, but everything before the rose, and to a certain extent probably after the rose.
Yes.
And those who take the image of the rose on and move.
It's a story of the
So
cosmos.
that sets the rose within the participation of the natural life cycle of the world in a very physical sense, right? Because like with the I have it as phoesis. Sorry, terms are bad, and I can't see because I'm blind. So this term, the re-experiencing of the physical, this remembrance within the physical self to remember the being mode, using physicality to remember it.
Yes.
So thus this rose that is growing out of the ground has the ground with it, and the blossoming of it isn't just the blossoming of the rose, but everything that comes before it, the dirt, the dust that it comes from.
And it's experiencing all that directly in the moment from the perspective of beingness.
Yeah, and through time as well. There is this time component that we have to contend with because we are beings that exist.
Well, that all can be seen from the present moment. That is exactly seen from the present moment. And that's why you'll see the sage.
At the blossoming rose. You can see where it came from. You can trace it down. You can see it when it's in a bud stage from.
And then you can see your thoughts about how people may interpret it down the road, appearing in the moment as well. All of that is tied into the very present moment and can be seen from the being mode. And we note how sages will oftentimes, like Ramana Maharshi, and it was Ramana actually, that would just sit there sometimes with a flower instead of speaking for hours and just looking at it. And basically inviting everyone else to look at it too. And that you can see eternity in a wildflower is the connotation there.
So as it shines as itself out of itself.
Yes.
Or from itself.
Yes. So
out
maybe
of within itself.
Yes. And so maybe then, and this makes sense to us, that the universe is like a rose blooming from itself.
Yeah.
It's ever expanding. There was some kind of Big Bang as well that it is imminently emitting from. Eternally emitting from. So if we drop that axial age belief that there must be a teleological story or narrative, and narrative being a way of symbolically representing through time how we can have a non-logical identity with ourselves. If we can get to that transframing that we do naturally when we look back at ourselves, like when we were a child, we weren't the same person. You know, we weren't the same weight. We didn't look the same. We didn't sound the same. We didn't think the same way. Yet it was still us. And so our brains are able to transframe. So maybe we can exact this capacity. And instead of focusing on an unfolding horizontal narrative, we can do the vertical ontology instead, connecting the depths of ourselves with the depths of that ever unfolding reality that we are immersed in.
Yeah. And so, like, the question is, you know, how do we get back to the narrative? And also, do we need it? Because does the rose need a narrative to rose, to shine out as the rose? Is the universe like the rose? But the thing with the narrative is it gives us a practical, so cognitive and existential standpoint in a non-logical entity. So the narrative helps us frame within a non-logical, like what he was talking about with like gaining insight from a story of somebody else. And obviously you're not that person, but like, yes, you're not that person, but at the same time, when you're reading it and you're going through the story, the narrative, you feel that person.
So can we do it instead of from the attainment having mode on a horizontal line, trying to get from here to there? Can we do it from here
and
to
it's
there?
not saying necessarily not to do it on horizontal line, because you know that does help creating narrative stories.
Well, he does say, can we
exact this narrative?
And instead of unfolding a horizontal narrative, he states, we can do the vertical.
Move it up into understanding the world instead of just understanding the
through
self.
the being mode, not through the having mode.
Yeah.
And it is, of course, in a reciprocal relation. So as being inquires into the ultimate nature of reality, it's also inquiring back into itself, and it's getting that reciprocal realization move going. Okay.
And through the non-logical identity.
Yes.
Like through this, not because, you know, like
that's our capacity to transframe. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah, because we're identifying, you know, our first frame with the next frame, and then the next frame, and the narrative.
And so instead of the unfolding narrative, we're connecting the depths of ourselves to the depths of reality.
Yeah. So we're moving the reframing from
time-based,
the
horizontal,
into
a
reality-based, and maybe
this
amount
moment
of reality within the moment, outside of time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And so then he describes how we have from the being mode,
and that's the objective. That's the objective view is taking that and moving it up.
Yes.
You know, opposed to the narrative in time. So
we can directly experience the rose just being a rose in that moment, with all of that entails.
From outside, if you will, if you
and see it prior to our subjective interpretation of it in its limitless beauty. So we can experience the pure shining forth and utilizing our relevance realization, our salience landscaping of what is before us into intelligibility.
Yeah.
And then we can also, from being, recognize that pure, ever ongoing withdrawing nature, that independent inexhaustibleness that the Tao Te Ching describes, the inexhaustible well. We can see that combinatorial explosive nature of reality, that infinite, ever growing, ever opening, ever unfolding, ever blossoming nature of reality.
The horizon continuously receding away with all the options upon the horizon.
It's like as you approach the center of a black hole, it is always the closer you get, the further you are away from the center, because it's always producing so much energy. It's pushing out so much as it's taking in.
Here's a more practical way to look at it. So
that's hard to say.
Stand any distance away from the wall. Take a step towards the wall. The next step, take a step that's half as long. The next step, half. Next step, half.
Yes.
You'll never reach the wall, but you'll always be taking steps. And that's practical. practical. But
At least it explains it in a way that we can comprehend. So,
and over time long enough where if you stand 100 feet from the wall and you take a step and your next step is half and next step is half, then you'll realize, oh, you can actually see, yeah, I'm never getting to that wall.
yeah, right. Yeah, you can't even figure out how to do those infinitesimal movements when you really get down to the sub-millimeter
beyond
level.
scooch. What's the measurement beyond scooch?
Okay, so we can't accept.
So that's pure withdrawal.
That transframing capacity to explore the depths of being with the depths of reality. And remember that aletheia from the being mode, that sense of sacredness as well. I love that we're touching back on the sense of sacredness that we have lost.
So the trajectory of transframing, closing on the relevant as it is opening into the moreness.
Mm-hmm.
The trajectory, so direction of the transframing, constantly opening the framing, going beyond the framing, closing in on the relevant at its opening into the moreness. So there's this in and out thing going within that phrase that he gave us, and that's kind of what's happening. Yet again, he's been prepping us for this. Opponent processes, agent arena processes, going back and forth at the same time, optimizing.
Yeah, how does human consciousness even work? How do we find what is relevant to us at any moment? Because it does seem like in any given situation, whatever is relevant.
Well, and that feeling feels
Taking
sacred.
up the bottle of water stands out. I can grab it.
Well, so that feeling of the direction you're going within your transframing, that's finding what is relevant and then constantly opening out into the moreness. When you have that feeling, that feels sacred. We base our practices off of that.
Mm-hmm.
We build our churches to give you that feeling. When you take entheogenic substances, you have this closing in. You're reframing while you're closing in onto what's relevant, but then it's opening up into what's the moreness.
There's like the reincorporation of old frames into new frames.
Yeah, and then as worshiping human beings, we will worship these experiences, or maybe not worship these experiences, but have these experiences as part of our practice of worshiping.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not a worshiper, still that wow,
you can still get a sense of
the awesomeness, the wonder that pulls you, that opens you up. It also focuses you in and opens you up at the same time. It shines out from you and also retreats from you at the same time, creating this.
So consciously exacting this capacity our brains have to realize what is relevant in any moment, we can actually turn the being mode's awareness of itself on itself, inquire into this mystery of being from the mystery of being, and we can then be able to see our framings of reality, break old frames that are no longer useful, reincorporate what is useful in whatever new things we have learned, incorporate them into new frames, and not be tied to those frames, even be able to be transframing constantly so that we can see from different points of view and perspectives, check in with the different views that we know are out there, and try and come up with new views even and also to challenge our existing
and accepting
ideas.
embracing of the non-logical movement from one frame to the other. Like, I'm not literally that person, but that is so me right now. Like the memes when you see somebody having a hard day or whatever.
Yeah, being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes to see from their perspectives.
It's not
That's
logical,
such a good exercise for us, because it does widen our capacity for awareness overall.
Even though it's not you, can still read it and put yourself in the character's shoes.
The more points of view you can consider, the more you can consider overall.
Yeah.
The more points in general you can consider overall, and that is infinitely helpful in our lives, to be able to stretch out our perception of reality and widen our breadth of awareness.
So that's all I got on that.
Yeah, that caught me up too. So let's go ahead. Let's jump on back in.
Jump on in.
So we can think of realness as a tonos, this creative tension. It's something that Barfield brings out tremendously and clearly in his work. Right? We can think of realness as a tonos, as a creative polar tension between, think of the word confirmation, coherence, right? And moreness. And remember, you need both. If the virtual reality just has the confirmation and the coherence, it falls flat. If it can't provoke a sense of opening and wonder, there's no element of surprise, if it's all assimilation and no accommodation, if it's all, right, assimilation and no accommodation, remember, accommodation is experienced as awe and wonder. If it's all of that, if it's just assimilation, and not accommodation, if it's just the foreclosure and never also the opening, if it's just the homing and never the numinous, see these themes? Then it's not real. It's not experienced as real. And that, being able to attune, and this is why the Tao is so, right, Taoism is such a powerful symbolism, right? You have the yin, which is the confirming, right, drawing down, right, and the yang is the opening up, and both of those interpenetrate. Think of the classic Tao symbol. Within the white is the black dot, within the black is the white dot, and they're sinuous because they're interpenetrating, interleaved together, and all of that is the disclosure of the inexhaustibleness of the Tao. I'm trying to make a convergent argument here, right? Taoism is all about the serious play with the serious play of being. And that's how Corbin describes it, right? When he's talking about gnosis, he talks about the play of being. So does Evans when he's talking about Corbin. So I'd like to pass now explicitly, leaving Heidegger behind now and moving into Corbin. I've already noted how deeply Corbin was influenced by Heidegger, but he's also, he's deeply influenced by Platonism, and that leads him into probably his deepest influence. So all of these things are important to Corbin. Heidegger, the Neoplatonic tradition, but most especially Neoplatonism within Persian Sufism. So Sufism is the mystical branch of Islam, and Corbin is particularly focused on Persian Sufism. And I think that's very something important that we should pause to note. One of the gifts of Corbin's work is to help us remember, and thereby overcome our ethnocentrism, how central, and I use that term decidedly, how central Persian philosophy is to the history of philosophy in the world. Persia plays a pivotal role, and I don't mean it as a neglected middle. Well, it is by us, but it shouldn't be a neglected middle. Persia plays a central role between, for example, right, the Arab world, the European world, and the world of India and China, the Asiatic world. And what's really important about Persian Sufism, and I can't, the history of Persia is a fraught one, right? We sort of think of now, and this is because of the history in this since the 70s. We think of Iran as sort of rabidly Muslim and something like that, and to a significant and that's played up by propaganda. It is not to deny that there's an Islamic fundamentalist totalitarian regime in control in Iran, but what I'm trying to do is challenge that as a monolithic representation of all of Persia and all of Persian culture. Instead, you have to remember that Persia was made Muslim via an Arab invasion that was nothing less than a genocide. And I know Persians, they remember this deeply to this day. So the attitude towards the Arab overlords is something that has become deeply woven into Persian culture. Why am I saying that? Because that means that the Persians were especially attracted to, at least for huge periods, Rumi and others, right? They are deeply attracted to Sufism. They're attracted to a mystical interpretation of Islam precisely because they are trying to find a form of liberation from an oppressive Arab right? Empire. So that means that it's important that it is Persian Sufism, and this deeply has an impact on Corbin. He's really taken up by this, and how that Persian Sufism has a much more, I'm trying not to be dismissive here, has a much more flexible relationship to Islam than you might think of when you think of Iran today in the world. Okay? And so, like reading the poetry of ancient Persia, well, not even ancient Persia, what the poetry from Persia since the Arab invasion and genocide, I think is an important thing to do, to remember these aspects. Now, Corbin did all of that. He read this stuff deeply, profoundly, repeatedly, extensively. Now, there's ways in which he suffers. There's ways in which, as a Frenchman, he will fundamentally misunderstand some of this literature. And I'm not going to say that he is a perfect interpreter, but I will say he is an insightful and important interpreter. So he draws all this in. He's drawing in the Heidegger and the Neoplatonism, and this is something you have to, and the Persian Sufis know this, the deep influence of Neoplatonism on Sufism, right? So there's Neoplatonism, then there is a mystical form of Islam, right? Deeply influenced by Neoplatonism, and then Corbin is bringing that into understanding Heidegger, and then he's bringing all of that as a way of trying to explain this gnosis and how this gnosis can ultimately be salvic and redemptive in the face of the meaning crisis. Remember, he talked about gnosis as transformative, salvic, participatory knowing, a deep at-one-ment, attunement at one-ment. See how all these things are resonating with each other. Now, what does Corbin bring to this that we don't have in Heidegger? And here's where I think you can see the influence of Sufism and the rich world of Persian poetry upon him. And I think this is an important thing. Corbin sees there and argues for, reading Corbin is very different than reading, it's like Heidegger in the sense that it's difficult, but because he's trying again to break out of the cognitive cultural grammar, but it's very lyrical, it's very beautiful, but sometimes you pick up the beauty, and that's again the influence of the Persian poetry on him. You pick up the beauty without, and then you should pause and say, yeah, but did I really understand what he just said? So you have to read, you almost have to recite Corbin and repeat Corbin. Now, he uses that kind of argumentation to make a claim that the recovery of gnosis is bound up with imagination in an important way. And you may think, oh no, John is just going to jump off into some decadent form of romanticism. No. Corbin is doing something very interesting about this. I recommend the Lachman book that I've recommended for Corbin. See also Avon's book, The New Gnosis that I've just mentioned. See all of Chetham's work, The World Turned Inside Out, Imaginal Love. The third one was, I think it was The Angelic Nature of Being. I can't remember the third title. Anyways, we'll put all the panels up. Chetham's work on Corbin is, in fact, I recommend reading Avon's and reading Chetham before you read Corbin. So if you take a look, Corbin is doing something very important with this. He's not using this word in the way we typically use it. And in order to bring that out, he actually makes a distinction that's going to be important, especially when we turn to talk about Jung. He makes a distinction between the imaginary and what he calls the imaginal. And it's the imaginal that is bound up with gnosis. So the imaginary is what we typically mean when we invoke the word imagination. We mean the purely subjective experience of generating inner mental imagery, which we know is not real, and that we can it's sort of completely in our control, and we can play with it as we wish. Okay? That is explicitly, clearly, definitively not what Corbin is talking about. Corbin is talking about the imaginal. And to try and convey the imaginal, I'm going to try and schematically represent it to you. Because if you don't get the imaginal, you don't get what Corbin is talking about. I also would say you ultimately do not get what Jung is talking about when he's talking about active imagination, because you'll just misunderstand active imagination as a purely imaginary experience as opposed to imaginal experience. And as I'll point out later, Corbin and Jung are deeply influential of each other. Corbin is much more open about that relationship. Corbin talks about and invokes Jung often critically, but at least clearly and explicitly and with credit, way more often than I see Jung talking about Corbin, which I think is a criticism I have of Jung. Okay, so let's try and represent this. So, first of all, think of two ways in which you sort of try and represent, come into cognitive contact with reality. One is, right, through abstract representations, the abstract intelligible world, the world that you get through your intellect, right? So you grasp reality as a mathematical formula or something like that, or you grasp reality as a purely formal entity. And then in contrast, there is, of course, the concrete, and of course, concrete and abstract are always relative terms, they're not absolute terms, the concrete sensible world, right? At the bottom here. So one thing the imaginal does is it actually mediates between these two. Right? It bridges between them. It allows them to come together in meaningfully structured experience. Because in my phenomenological experience, of course, there's both an intelligible order, but that I can abstract intellectually, but that intelligible order also affects the way I come into sensual contact concretely with things. Okay? So, the imaginal mediates between these. And one of Corbin's arguments is, and do you see what he's doing here? He's arguing that the Cartesian cultural grammar, right, that basically, replicates the axial two worlds, but within us, right? So right, here's the world of mind, right? The abstract, intelligible world, pure mind, and the concrete, sensible is the world of pure matter, right? This is the Cartesian division. And what Corbin is arguing is, yeah, but we've lost the imaginal that bridges between, right, those two worlds, between the mind and the material. Now, of course, Descartes split things in another way, and the imaginal mediates between those. And these, of course, they're not the same. That's why I represent them with different axes, but they are not independent. That's why I'm putting them together within the schema. The imaginal also bridges between the purely subjective and the purely objective. So to use a term I've been trying to develop with you, and we saw it all through Heidegger, the imaginal is deeply transjective in nature. So it mediates, and it's transjective. And then what you have to do is you have to see this whole thing sort of in motion, right, which I can't draw for you, right? Because the imaginal isn't a static relation. It's also a constant transformative transframing. There's a movement to the imaginal. It is vibrant and vital in that way. There's a movement to it. Okay? So, this is what Corbin means by the imaginal. It's a use of images, but not using them subjectively, using them transjectively, and we'll try to come back to that, right? In a way that mediates, bridges, right? Integrates the abstract intelligible world and the concrete sensible world together. But again, not just statically, but in this ongoing transformative transframing. So, because of the centrality of the imaginal to Corbin, and he explicitly understood himself as doing this and stated this, right? He was deeply opposed to fundamentalism. And here you can, of course, see the connection to the Persian history I was relating to. He's deeply opposed to fundamentalism and literalism. Why? Because fundamentalism and literalism, right, first of all, they reify this, they make it static, right, and they put things into, right, either the abstract intelligible world or the concrete sensible world, or just into subjectivity or just into objectivity. They freeze this and then they fracture it. And thereby they completely lose the nexus of the imaginal. And for Corbin, right, if you lose the imaginal, you lose the capacity for gnosis. And then if you lose the capacity for gnosis, you lose the capacity for waking up within the being mode through aletheia to being, and the ground of being in sacredness. This is going to be something we're going to keep seeing. And again, something that Heidegger doesn't make explicit, but it's explicated in Corbin, the deep ongoing criticism to fundamentalism and literalism. It's a deep component of Jung as well, right? Jung sees fundamentalism and literalism as the antithetical movement of thought and being in the world to everything he is trying to promote as a response to the meaning crisis. It is also deeply antagonistic to what Barfield is talking about when he's talking about poetic participation.
Poetic participation, I like that. I just finished out this notebook. Had to start a new one.
Oh, man. Yeah, I'm almost at the end of this one, too.
Woo. All right.
So, realness.
Yes, realness as a tonos, as a creative tension. That's so cool. So the creative tension.
Yeah, well, it's that tension between
the pure shining forth and the pure constant withdrawal.
And that's kind of what it seems like. So if you could imagine, just imagine in your head right now, the shining forth is this moving force going in you, and then the withdrawing, moving out, and it creates this spring effect. But then flip it. The shining from you is now shining out, and then so you get that weird effect that in movies when you have like the hallway gets longer but the character's face gets closer.
Yes.
What that is you pull back the actual camera while zooming in, so you're doing two at the same time, and it gives you this opening while narrowing.
And narrowing effect at the same time.
Yeah,
yes.
Oh, yeah.
That is how the being mode can experience itself and get to know the mystery of being more.
And it has to be both to be real.
Yes, and this creative tension, think of looking at the sun. It's constantly revealing itself to us. It's shining forth, but in that constant revealing, you can take a picture and a picture. Every millisecond, it's always going to be different on into infinity. It's producing infinite newness. So there's always that horizon of unintelligibility. There's a point that you're not going to be able to get past. It's always going to have more to say. It's an infinitely withdrawing horizon, even as it's shining forth. And that creative tension is what gives realness to reality.
And to create a image that I'm sure that we're all familiar with, but following the setting sun to gain our directions. Though we're continuously walking towards it, it is continuously going further from us.
Yeah.
And then when the sunset comes, we are overloaded with this realness of the fact we can see the horizon, we can see the interaction, we are in wonder and wow and of the experience. Never can we get closer to the sun, well, at least on Earth. But it's always there. It's always shining at us, and it's always retreating, and we're also retreating from it.
Yes,
And
it always
towards
has infinitely more to say. Will never be done seeing
Yeah,
it.
because there will be a new day that you have to
Yes.
follow the setting sun to keep going, finding your way.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well,
There you go. Nice.
You know, a little story to keep my head in
So
the
this
action.
this tonos, this creative tension, we see it in words of how we measure reality, such as confirmation. You know.
Oh,
So there's
or
that
pro or con.
yes,
Or, yeah.
So that oppositional orientation, that relevance realization utilizes. We see this in this creative tension. So we see it in coherence. So all these things show up in realness. And if a virtual reality can't provoke wonder, there's no surprise. It's just an assimilation of things, but there's no confirmation for us to experience it as real. He gets into describing the yin yang symbol now as he starts going into Taoism, and defines the yin as a confining aspect of reality, the yang as an opening aspect of reality, but both are interweaved together. They interpenetrate each other. So
and
the
you can see
inexhaustibleness of reality is shown there in that symbol.
And with that, you could think of one as a giving a potential and one as seeing a potential. Or receiving a potential, rather, excuse me. So, the yin would be this receiving and
Yes.
consolidating the potential, and the yang is this giving and opening up of a potential at the same time, right?
Yes.
And that's how batteries work.
So Taoism is like a serious play with the serious play of being, the nature of being itself, with the nature of reality. And Corbin, who is influenced by Neoplatism, looks at the Persian Sufism, which was also influenced by Neoplatism, as helping us remember the being mode in a way that overcomes ethnocentrism. And Persian plays a very important role in history because it linked the Arabian world, the European world, and the Asiatic world through the spice trade. And it was like a central hub. So there was so many different cultures coming in there and influencing one another. And the Persian poets of the time were especially attracted to Sufism, a mystical interpretation of Islam, because I think it sounds like, as Vervaeke also interprets it, a way to liberate from that tyrannical empire.
It's a philosophy and a practice that came from the liberation of those who are conquered by an oppressive regime.
Yes.
And I mean that in the truest
Persian
sense,
poetry
not
is
the way we use
beautiful.
it in this. So
And profound. Yes.
yeah, so it's and also interestingly enough, like taking in the religion and philosophy of the conquering regime, and then continuing it, purifying it, making, or I don't want to say purifying because it's not made pure or anything like that, but condensing it and making the best out of what they had in rebellion to what was oppressing them, if they will. Not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, taking the baby out of it, raising it as their own, and trying to, I don't want to say use it, but use it as a way to make meaning within their own meaning crisis at that point in time.
Right. So Corbin makes some pretty insightful interpretations and notices the Neoplatonic influence, brings that out to explain how gnosis can be salvational, or gnosis, can be salvational, redemptive. It can lead us to attunement, to atonement, and this is, again, the vertical path of self-transcendence, of self-realization, of the practice that it seems that all of the great spiritual traditions ultimately were trying to point us to. Certainly Christ was trying to get us to realize the truth within ourselves, the heaven that is already within.
Yeah. And I guess Corbin's draw also is Persian Sufism is impacted by Neoplatonism. So it wasn't an alien thing. It was actually, like he could look into it and see familiarity between his own understanding and path, and, and then be able to really look into it.
And that's what he does. He sees and he argues for the recovery of gnosis, bound up with imagination in an important way, not imagination as in the imaginary fantasy kind of subjective inner mental imagery that we can bring up in our own minds, but the imaginal, which is a wholly different use of imagination.
Well, it's
So
the
it's what mediates between the abstract ideas of our mind and the concrete, sensible world or
well,
of pure matter.
this is what we use, like say an icon, which is an image. It's an image we create to bridge this purely abstract, conceptual, mind subjective world with a concrete,
Great example. Right.
sensible matter objective world where you can grab the thing, you can look at it, but that by having that thing also allows you to go into the imagination, the subjective part. So having an objective physical concrete reality triggering or facilitating the abstract intellectual mind world. So this imaginal would be like, just the way I'm understanding it is a good metaphor, or what's the other word, for an icon, or there's another word I'm not remembering right now, but basically a good icon, for lack of a better word. Damn, trying to think of that word and it messed me up. But anyways, it's a mediatory force. You could have an object that does that, but then you can also have a way of thinking that also does that, and that's what imaginal thinking or imaginal experience is the bridging of the two portions of the world we experience, the mind and the objective.
It allows the two abstract and the concrete to come together in a way so that we can experience it meaningfully.
And does it within motion, not static, but moving. So, the idea of an icon would be more static, but if you could put it into, say, a practice, instead of poems or songs or psalms or things like that, and we can see this contact between both in a moving, non-static way, because that's Corbin's issues with fundamentalism and literalism is either or static. It's either subjective, mental, the mind world, or the objective, concrete world. We're going to make things happen. We're going to make the better man,
Very
the
literal.
Ubermensch. We're going to make it happen. Or we're going to be super philosophical and only living in the mind. And that's, the problem with the fundamentalism or literalism. And I'd say fundamentalism is within the mind, the subjective fundamentals, and literalism would be of the
Concrete.
we say literally.
Yes.
It literally happened.
Yeah, we're taking it literally. So Corbin was looking at that Cartesian, that dualistic cultural grammar that separates the world, and how we've lost the imaginal sense that mediates between. And then, like you said, it mediates between the purely subjective and the objective, because the imaginal is transjective in nature. It has a constant, and this is where you're talking about the movement, a constant transformative, transframing potential to it, bridging the aspects of experience, of reality together. And Corbin was deeply opposed to fundamentalism and literalism because they make static our perceptions of reality. We freeze them in place, and then we fracture and divide these different aspects of reality. We break them apart from one another, and we lose the nexus, that connection and mediation that the imaginal allows us to experience. So we lose gnosis. We lose the capacity to awaken to the world through being itself. And that is the whole point.
Yeah, we lose the sacredness.
Religious practice. That is the religio, the experience of transcendence.
Well, we lose
oneness.
The participation in it as well.
Yes.
Because you don't participate.
We're no longer involved
static.
in the serious play with the serious play of reality. That's right. Man, okay. So
imaginal. That's a new word. I'm gonna have to.
Yeah, and so Corbin, building off of Heidegger clearly was deeply influenced by Taoism, and you can see that. And if anybody out here has ever read the Tao Te Ching, it's always worthy revisitation, probably at least once a year in one's life. There are certain works that are so infinitely unfolding that we can always gain new wisdom from them.
Doesn't that have for every year of your life there is is that the book that has for every year of life there is a poem to be read of that year of life that is to be contemplated. Is that the Tao Te Ching, or is that?
I'm honestly not sure if that's how it works. I was just thinking that in general, that
they
it's
have,
useful
like,
to
so
come
many,
back to. Yeah.
Like, you know, in certain traditions, like a modern American traditional interpretation of other traditions. But yeah, on your 34th birthday, you read the 34th passage within it, and you contemplate all year on that passage.
I like that.
Yeah. So, and it's kind of set up to where you are within your development as a cognizant human being. I think that's the Tao Te Ching. I'm really bad with names, so you're lucky I'm keeping up with any of this. It all blurs together.
If it is, then that totally fits what I just said, so we'll take it. We'll take it and we'll run with it. All right, guys, let's jump back in.
Either way, there's a book out there that has a passage for every year of your life, and you should read and contemplate
You could
each
totally
passage.
use the Tao Te Ching in that way. I love that. Yeah, because I think it does have about 100 different little,
I think
poems in it. Yeah.
Give it a
Radio.
try.
All right, fam, here we go. We're jumping back in. Let's, do we need a little rewind on this one? I don't think we do. I think we're good to go.
A good stopping point.
Yeah, here we go. All right, fam.
So we're seeing, again, a potential way in which we can understand Heidegger's critique of ontotheology, because there is a tendency, right, and all of these thinkers keep pointing to it, if we get into the having mode and we get into ontotheology and we have the supreme being and we have our propositions about this ultimate being, right, that we can think that the way in which we should be is to have these propositions in a fundamentalist, literalist fashion, and we lose all of this. And what you'll hear, right, is you'll hear the invocation of the symbolic as a dismissive term. Yes, yes. You can read this symbolically, but it's just symbolic, meaning it has no real relevance or importance to you. Corbin is trying to argue exactly the opposite. If you have an attitude towards the symbolic that is dismissive, then of course you have lost the capacity for gnosis, which means you have lost the capacity to remember to overcome in aletheia the forgetfulness of being, to come out of the deepest kind of modal confusion. I see somebody as exemplifying this, although I don't think he's directly influenced by Corbin. I see Jonathan Pajot is trying to bring us back to this gnosis of the symbol and how we should not be dismissive of it. We should not try and slide it into either a conceptual world or a sensual world. We should not interpret it as merely subjective or reject it because we can't make it clearly objective for us. Look at all the ejecting going on. Subject, reject. Okay? So, now to try and bring out the imaginal in a way that connects to Dasein, your being in the world, because remember, your self-knowledge and your participatory knowing of being are interpenetrating and knowing together. I have to bring out something of Corbin that if you read it and you haven't done all of this work, you, I guarantee, will misread it and misunderstand it. And it's a part that's difficult for me, because it pushes my buttons in ways that I don't like, which is why I keep reading this stuff, right? Because I have a tremendous sense that it's pushing my buttons in a way that they need to be pushed so that I could perhaps wear free from them, at least to some degree. And here's where Corbin is different from Heidegger, where he really does pick up on the sense of sacredness that is going on within the imaginal. Okay, let's talk about how Corbin understands the symbol, the imaginal understanding of the symbol, as opposed to the imaginary understanding, the dismissive understanding of the symbol. Okay, so what are these features? The feature that was brought out when Chris and I had that excellent discussion, the translucency of a symbol. You look at it, but you look through it, in both meanings of the word, by means of it and beyond it, like the way I'm looking through my glasses. The symbol is translucent. I can look at it, but I can also simultaneously look through it. And I can put those two into an important dialogue. Why do I want a dialogue between looking at it and looking through it? Why is it so important to have those in dialogue with each other? Because that is how the symbol can help you to capture the non-logical identity between your agent arena now in this frame and the agent arena in a more comprehensive, encompassing frame. So symbols are translucent. As I've already argued, they're transjective. Trying to make them either subjective or objective is aligned with a having mode dismissal of how the symbol is trying to challenge you to transcendence. If you are not transcending in response to a symbol, you really haven't understood a symbol. If you just treat it as an allegory that you can replace with other literal terms, then you haven't really remembered through the symbol. There has been no aletheia. In your pursuit of the correctness of truth, you have forgotten the aletheia of the symbol. And this is why I'm so critical of people who are so dismissive of symbolism. Right? The symbol is not only transjective, it's trajective. It's putting you on a trajectory of transformation, as I was just articulating. The symbol is transformative. Remember, the transformative of the inner man. It's transformative of you at a fundamental level. And the symbol is ultimately trans-temporal, trans-spatial, because it has to do with this movement between worlds, which really isn't a narrative temporal spatial movement. It's an ontological movement between, a smaller frame and a larger frame. I represent it with an arrow, but it isn't movement through space and time. It isn't a narrative change. It's an ontological shift. So I'm trying to pick all of these up. The translucency of the symbol, it's transjective, it's trajective, it's transformative, and it's trans-temporal spatial. Aletheia, through the symbol. That's how you do gnosis. Now let's give the troubling example that is central to Corbin. And I found it disturbing in ways, and some of you will too, and I hope so. What I ask for right now is be patient, because I want to unpack this. I don't want to try and be dismissive, but I want to show you that Corbin is not using this notion in a way you standardly will. And like I say, I hesitate to do. So the most important symbol of this for Corbin is what he calls the angel. And that's why Chetham puts it in the title of his book, and Avens puts it in the subtitle of his book on the New Gnosis. As soon as I put that up there, many of you are now rolling your eyes, as I did, and there's a part of me that I can feel there's tension behind my eyes wanting to roll them. Right? Because, oh no, angels, oh, it was silly, superstitious idea, cherubs, and only New Age people that, swing crystals, and, angels and all that stuff, and it's like, oh no. What a disaster. And I deeply appreciate that, okay? I'm not being dismissive of that. I would say that that's an imaginary understanding of angels, one that Corbin himself repeatedly and deeply rejects. What's he talking about, and why is he using this term? Okay, he's using it because it's a term that is that fills some of the literature of the Persian Sufism that he reads. I want to propose to you an alternative way of understanding this to what, our sort of cultural imaginary way of understanding this. Let me go back in our history first to try and get a different way of leading into this notion, and then take it into some current cutting-edge analytic philosophy, believe it or not, and show how that fits well and comports well with the cognitive science we have been doing throughout this response to the four prophets of the meaning crisis. Okay, so this is, now I'm making use of the seminal work of Stang. Stang wrote a book called The Divine Double, which is a follow-up to a book he wrote on pseudo-Dionysus, and he's written some brilliant articles on pseudo-Dionysus that brings all this out. Now, so the book is called The Divine Double, and he's pointing to a particular motif that was prevalent in the Mediterranean world during, and right, remember we talked about the Hellenistic dominant side and thereafter, and you have the rise of Gnosticism and early Christianity. So during this period, and across many different groups, you see it within Gnosticism. He makes a clear case, and you know, again, some people are going to know, no, but he makes a clear case for this motif showing up within early Christianity. You can see it in Manichaeism. You can see it clearly in Neoplatonism and Plotinus. This notion of the divine double. I'm spending time on this because you won't understand Jung also if you don't understand this divine double. Okay, so what's the notion of the divine double? It becomes prevalent through the Mediterranean spirituality of the Hellenistic and post-Hellenistic period, and I didn't talk about it that much when I talked about the Gnostics and the Neoplatonists, because I wanted to talk about it here, because here is where I think it belongs. This was the idea. And again, part of this is how this is so antithetical to our way of thinking, especially our decadent romantic way of thinking. So the decadent romantic way of thinking, you know, that sort of goes back to Rousseau, is, you know, you're born with your true self, and you have to be true to your true self, and you have to express it, and that's what it is to be authentic. So this has become pervasive in our culture, right? In this Mediterranean spirituality, the motif is very different. It's this idea that here I'm here and I have a self right now, or they might say a suke, right? A spirit or a soul. I have myself right now, but it is bound to the divine double. There's a double of me, right, that is archetypically more important than me. And that what I am doing, my true self is actually this divine double. And my spiritual path is to reunite this self with that divine double. And to bring it, right, bring the two together. And that realization of their interdependence culminates in, right, a kind of mystical union between them. Now, this is still all very fuzzy language. I'll grant you that. But first of all, notice how this is very interesting. Step aside from the mythos for a minute and think about the concept. So you see how this is Gnostic, right? Not in the sense of Gnosticism, but well, a little bit in the sense of Gnosticism, because there's this transgressive. It's trying to break grammar. It's trying to break the grammar of thinking of your true self as something you have. Your identity is something you have, that you're born with it, it's in you, and what you have to do is express it authentically. And that grammar is being subverted and transgressed by the idea that your true self is beyond you, and you have to aspire to it. And you see there's a bit of the Socratic element there, right? That your true self is something you aspire to, rather than something you have. The true self is something realized through the being mode of self-transcendence, not through the having mode of inner possession. And so the divine double, right, it is pervasive. It's a pervasive mythos. And what I'm first of all going to recommend is, and I think this is a very fair recommendation, you understand Corbin's use of the angel as a symbolic way of talking about the divine double. And you may say, okay, that's great, and I see why it challenges the grammar, but I don't care about this because, all right, I didn't believe in angels, and I don't believe in divine doubles, so telling me about angels in terms of divine doubles, what does that gain me? That gains me nothing. Well, I want to be very careful here. I want to start a problem. I want to start you on a deep analysis of this, right? Let's put aside the mythos. Let's put aside the metaphysical claims, right? And let's focus in on this very process of aspiration towards a better self, towards a more angelic self, right? Because it goes back to the Socratic project, but you can also see it in the depths of, right, our current. Sorry, not that's too broad. Sorry, you can see it. You know, this process of aspiration towards a greater, better, fuller self is, of course, all the way through Maslow. It's all the way through Jung, right? This aspirational process is central to a lot of the mythos that we have about talking about, right, how we are going to normatively improve not our situation, but ourself. So, is the divine double a crazy idea? Well, in one sense it is. If you just sort of literalize the mythos into some sort of axial two-world mythology, right, and metaphysics, sure. But maybe it's not a crazy idea if we go back and try to ask this question. Instead of asking the question, look, and this is what I meant about real dialogue, philosophia, not philonokia. Instead of asking the question, should I believe that? First ask yourself the question, why did so many different groups of people in that world believe it? What was going on there? What was it doing? And here is where I think I can immediately invoke the important work which I've discussed repeatedly throughout the entire argument of this entire series, the important work of L.A. Paul and transformative experience. And that was bound up with the way we talk about gnosis. Now, I alluded to somebody else's work that was influenced and from the same sort of, I don't know what to call it, school as L.A. Paul's work. And this is the really important work of Agnes Collard. And her book is entitled Aspiration. And she's arguing for a neglected form of rationality that is best understood through aspiration. And rationality, what? Remember, I don't use rationality to mean management of the logical management of argumentation. Rationality means any systematically reliable internalized psychotechnology that reliably and systematically affords you overcoming self-deception and affords you cultivating enhanced connectedness, enhanced meaning in life. That's why the notion of rationality I've argued for is bound up with the right. It can culminate, it can point towards the cultivation of wisdom. So let's talk about yourself before the transformation or before you launch into the aspirational process, and the self afterwards, S1 and S2. Now, L.A. Paul tends to represent this as a much more sort of rapid transition. And I think there's important truth in that, the insight, whereas Collard is representing it much more, not incrementally, that's not the right word, but much more developmentally, having a much more extended developmental trajectory. And you can reconcile those, I think, quite readily by seeing qualitative development as a sequence of insightful transformations. So I don't think there's any deep inconsistency here. Okay, so what's the problem here? Well, as I've already pointed out, with any genuine quantitative, I used exactly the wrong word, I apologize. As I've pointed out, with any genuine qualitative development, you just get sort of more things, more beliefs, more experiences. Qualitative development is why I am so different in kind from that kid that was born in Hamilton. It's a fundamental difference of competence, of what I can know and what I can do and what I can be, rather than just how much. Right? So, I've already pointed out that you have an issue here of non-logical identity. Okay? So this is not an identity relation that can be captured by the fundamental identity theorem in logic, that A is identical to A, meaning that they share all the same properties. We do not. John in Hamilton and John in Toronto, John in Hamilton then and John in Toronto now, we are not this, right? We have a non-logical identity. And I've brought that out, and how much Gnosis is about the difficulties, trying to overcome the difficulties that this poses because of this non-logical identity. And I'm not going to repeat these arguments. Go back and look at them when I talk about Gnosis. We cannot reason our way through this. We cannot infer our way through this. And Callard is deeply in agreement with this aspect. You cannot deliberate your way through it. You cannot decide your way through it. Right? So, what is the nature of the relation? Right? Well, Callard thinks it's aspirational. It involves what she calls aspiration. But she's at pains to point something out that L.A. Paul doesn't, which I think is very important. Right? You can't, if you don't include this process as part of what you mean by this term, you're going to get into a deeply self-refuting position. Because my relationship to rationality and my relationship to wisdom are aspirational. I am aspiring to become rational precisely because I am not currently that rational. And if the aspiration to rationality is not part of rationality, you're getting into a weird kind of self-refutation. The aspiration of rationality is constitutive of the ongoing process of being rational, and therefore it must be included in your notion of rationality. And notice how we're getting back towards the Platonic idea of the deep interpenetration of love and reason. Took a long time, eh? Took a long time to circle round back to that. Right? Of course, this is also the case for wisdom. It's also, look, think about this way. One of the things I need to do to become rational is to become more educated. But Keller argues explicitly, right? A genuine education, well, there's different meanings to that word now. One is just the accumulation of facts and skills and stuff like that. But for many, and this was supposed to be, maybe it still is, the defining feature of a liberal education. Liberal, to liberate you. Gnosis, to save you, to liberate you from existential entrapment. A liberal education is designed to make you into a better self, a better person, which is why it seems so useless to people who want to manipulate and control you. Think about that. When you side with, liberal education, silly people, bottom line, your side, I think you're getting on the wrong side. Because we're losing something there. Right? So a liberal education, and this is what it classically meant when you go back into the Middle Ages, is gnosis. It's aspirational, and you don't know what it's going to be like. Remember all that stuff about L.A. Paul. So let me just leave you with the example from Callard, and then we'll come back and talk about this in the next episode and expand this whole. What am I leading you towards? I'm leading you towards that this is the relationship between the existing self and the divine double. Or another way perhaps of putting it, the divine double is a symbol in Corbin's sense that allows you to move from yourself now to yourself then, to the better self. One of the examples that Callard gives in aspiration is, and think about how this fits in with a liberal arts education, somebody who wants to come to appreciate music. And notice how that word appreciation means both understanding and a gratitude. It has a connotative, right, emotional aspect, and has a denotive conceptual aspect. Cognitive aspect, I should say. I will understand the music. So I want to, let's say, I don't currently get classical music, but I have an inkling, And it's really important, I think, that Charles Williams and Barfield and Tolkien and C.S. Lewis called themselves the Inklings. I have an inkling that there's a self and a world there. Remember we talked about, right, the person trapped in this world, but a sense that there might be a better self and a better world over there. I have an inkling that, right, I should like classical music. But I don't currently like classical music. I have to come to be the kind of being that, right, appreciates classical music. How do I do that? How do I bridge from me now not appreciating, not getting, not liking, not enjoying classical music, to somebody who can sincerely say, I love classical music. I really get it now. How can we use this phrase, and it's, notice how it's so rich and resonant with, contact epistemology, right? Right? That now I have a taste for music. I have an acquired taste for it. Let's get behind the metaphor. How is it? Right? And notice when you taste something, you're putting it into your being. It's not only contact, right? It's even consumption, not in the having mode sense, but taking it deeply in, right? What is it to move that way? What I'm trying to show you is that Corbin's talk about the angel is a way of him invoking and bringing into activity all of this stuff about symbolism that we're talking about and integrate it with this process of aspirational rationality that is so central to self-transcendence and so central to us becoming more rational and more wise. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Oh yeah. Meow, 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 meow. Rough, rough, rough. Rough, rough, rough. Rough, rough, rough. Meow.
The meows are turning from grumpy into more like, oh, yes, I see. Yes.
Yeah, they're cheering up.
Well, I won't call it cheer. Maybe the realization of aspiration, but not cheer.
Hey.
I'm
I
not
dig
cheery,
it.
damn it.
Revelations of aspiration.
Oh, that'd be a good album or song name. Revelations of Aspiration.
Revelations of aspiration. I'm writing it down.
It's kind of like what the awards that.
It's a good title for a book. It's a good chapter title. It's a lot of things.
Well, the awards that. I guess the Hollywood elite give each other now. That just seems so stupid. Were originally, revealing, showing respect to somebody actualizing their aspirations to be, a great actor or a great musician or whatever.
Yes.
Now it's just, whatever, but, still.
Yeah, no, I get you, though, on that celebratory aspect. So where we left off, Vervaeke was noting how there's a tendency for us to drop in to the having mode when we are relating with this idea of an ultimate being, going on about propositions about an ultimate being. We go into a fundamentalist, literalistic, propositional mode rather than a being mode, communion kind of relationship with the ultimate nature of reality, with this thing that we call God. Thinking of it as a separate ultimate being that we have the right version of is what causes us to go fundamentalist, literalistic, propositional, rather than aspirational, as the being mode allows us. And we should not be dismissive of symbolism and interpret symbols merely as something that can be taken subjectively or objectively. We have to recognize the transjective power of symbols to bring out the imaginal in a way that allows us a sense of sacredness. Because symbols allow us at once, they're translucent to us and transjective in that we can look at a symbol, but we can also look through a symbol because a symbol is loaded with pointers towards meaningfulness. Right? Symbols challenge us to transcendence. It helps us put that looking at and looking through both of those processes into a dialogue. So a symbol is not just an allegory or a metaphor. A symbol points to an aletheia.
And one that we have forgotten.
A truth we have forgotten. That's right. Because the symbol, it's being transjective. It's also it's on a trajectory, but it's a trans-spatial trajectory, like a movement between worlds of ontologies, of smaller frames to larger frames. So it's an ontological shift, not a movement through time. It's trans-temporal.
Yeah, like what we were talking about. It's not this, horizontal movement through time, but
Yes.
the vertical.
It's the
outside
vertical.
of the
That's
time.
right.
Yeah.
So
So the aletheia through the symbol is
that's
gnosis,
how we do gnosis. Yeah.
or gnosis.
Gnosis. Tomato, tomato.
And then Corbin spoke on angels in the oh no, which the oh no of angels is the imaginary understanding, not necessarily the imaginal, the looking through. What does angel mean as an analogy, opposed to angels touched by an angel?
What does it mean as a symbol and an analogy in a dialogue together? So beyond our imaginary, fantastical representations of the angel alone as some kind of metaphor for some new age kind of vision,
So
we look at the relationship between that symbol and the concept of a divine double.
yeah, and that was Stang.
Stang wrote on the divine double. That's
so
right.
the imaginal angel that we were speaking of, not the imagination of an angel, two wings and whatever, but the thing that we look through to get the idea of what the word angel is trying to show us is the divine double.
Yes. It's bound up with this idea of the divine double. Okay, so basically, I have a self-perception. It's in the spiritual idea that we're playing with here. Is that? Go ahead if you got it.
I think you got it.
I'm still piecing this together.
This divine double is so antithetical to the decadent, decaying, romantic idea of the true self, the way we think of it in the right. Oh, you just if you can just do all these things.
Yeah, if I can have these things, then I can.
I'd be my true self. If I had the things that serve me right, I'm my true self. But my self is bound to the divine double. So this divine double is what you could be in your ultimate. I don't want to say perfection, but perfection. You'll never reach it, but ultimately, what is that true self that you could reach? Not like if I just have this or have this or have, it's like, what am I doing?
So it's like there's an ultimate realized version of oneself at the end of time that is your true self, and the goal.
It's not held down by the sticky relationship or the relationships that stick to self, but what self could truly be.
That's right.
The ultimate expression of self that you may never reach, right?
That's right. That's right. The ultimate expression of your potential self.
So it's almost like a pulling force.
So
that's
there's
like pulling you
kind
up
of guardian angel at the end of time, almost kind of vision of self. So the Persian mystics had this view that their true self is the divine double, and my goal in life is to cultivate a union, a mystical union with my divine double, to become this.
Yeah.
Rather than the true self as something that we have now. The true self is beyond, and we must aspire to it rather than something that we have. Yeah,
opposed to something that we have to uncover and unbury with the crap that we stick on ourselves. It's something that we have to build towards.
Yes.
We have to reunite with.
It's a process of aspiration rather than accumulation or acquisition. It's defined in access through self-transcendence, being mode versus the having mode. So putting aside the mythos and the metaphysical ideas, let's look at the symbol of the angel as aspirational towards a truer self.
Yeah, so the divine double being the divine mythos of selfness. Angel, the symbolic divine double. So
it's not about how we might.
What does this give me? This divine double.
Right. Well, it's not about improving our situations and what it gives us. It's about improving ourselves. Right.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
It's the process in which we improve ourselves more than just the improvement of the self.
Yes. So now we're looking at, so why did so many people in this time in Persia believe and practice this? And L.A. Paul, who wrote the book Transformative Experience, and then Agnes Callard come into play now. Agnes Callard, she writes
so
on
before we go to
aspiration.
that, though, the question is why did so instead of asking why am I drawn towards this or trying to understand why did so many believe it? What instead of why do I believe it? So why? Well, I would say probably why is because it's this integration of the subjective and the objective yet again.
Yes. It was a way of playing through the imaginal to unite the abstract and the concrete, in a serious kind of play.
In a way that so I guess because it's this aspiration to a better self is central to the mythos of the normative improvement of self. Mm-hmm. And yet again, so normative is a z-axis function in the way we've been following this. So
yes.
Yet again, moving up, not through time, but
ontologically, yes. So aspiration, it's like a neglected form of rationality.
Yeah.
She's really big about this. And rationality is really any systematic, reliable psychotechnology that allows us to overcome self-deception and enhance meaning in life. So it's not just like argumentative rationality. Rationality and aspirationally can afford the cultivation of wisdom.
Yeah, so there's the before the aspiration and after the aspiration, and Vervaeke calls this S1 and S2. So S1 is before aspiration and is a qualitative.
Yeah,
before
we could
this,
say
I have these qualities that are within it that I can identify.
State of self 1, state of self 2, we can call them,
And so after aspiration is the difference. Okay, so it cannot be how much. Okay, so the difference is not of like a how much, and not but a non-logical way is damn.
Well, we do know that.
I need to rewrite my notes.
We do know that if the aspiration of rationality is not a part of rationality, rationality itself becomes self-inferential. Rationality needs aspiration in order to be a healthy rationality.
Yeah.
It must aspire to go beyond itself. It must be willing to self-correct and self-challenge, break frame, and be transjective. It must be willing to transcend its ideas. So that makes sense. Aspiration is necessary for rationality. So we're really trying to bring back love and reason into rationality, because we must have a love of truth rather than a mere want for acquisition of knowledge for us to be able to cultivate wisdom and overcome self-deception. We must love the truth more than our ideas, more than our certainty, more than being right.
Yeah, that's where, like, there at the end, Vervaeke was talking about, it's like, I don't have appreciation for classical music, but something is pulling me towards having a taste for it.
I have an inkling that there's something here.
Yeah.
Yes.
So aspiration is liberation.
Yes. Aspiration allows us to liberate ourselves from our old ideas so we can grow.
Yeah, yes. He said that aspiration is meaningless to manipulators. And that makes sense, because when you want to manipulate somebody, like, and really get them to do what you want, you break down their own personal aspirations, and you get rid of them, and then you replace them with what you want to do.
Yeah,
right?
With what you want them to have. That's right.
So liberation, education, and these are sticky, touchy words, because the word liberation and education have been perverted to such a degree that it's barely recognizable at this point.
And the institution of liberal education itself has been so corrupted at this point.
But what
liberalism means something wholly different than what classical liberalism
means. Yes.
Liberal
education should be developing a deep sense of gnosis within people, and not the knowing of a lived experience, but the true participatory knowing of going through the process and the practice in order to understand, gain revelation, and then underlying all that the aspiration to do
It
so.
must inspire us to aspire
Yeah, and
beyond
we have
ourselves.
to be, inspire us to aspire to continue going.
Yeah.
Because, dude, it's hard. Waking up is hard.
And to
That's why
challenge
we
your
have
own
coffee.
ideas is hard,
Yeah,
because
man.
we're attached to our ideas. We form egos, like self-images around our
we're
ideas.
attached as much as they are attached to us.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, we're identifying as our ideas, and we think that when somebody attacks our ideas, they're attacking us. So it's really hard for us to change our minds about. That's why certainty is so dangerous, and we shouldn't be so identified with our ideas, our beliefs.
So
We're so much deeper than that.
to break this S1 and S2 and aspiration down is S1 is the existing self where you're at right now.
Yes.
S2 is the divine double, the better self, and aspiration is the thing that bridges the existing pitiful, lazy self now with the inkling that gets us into trying to realize the better self, even if better self is something like perfection and we can't actually get to the fullness of it.
Yes. Yeah.
But we still aspire towards it.
Sure. Yeah. And that's why, the Christ character is so helpful for people. Aspiring towards this ultimate perfected being that you'll never ever reach gives you a trajectory that we can all follow and constantly improve by.
Yeah.
And will never be done. There's no cap to enlightenment, as they say.
And you know what, kids?
Which
That's
I love.
no cap.
It's no cap.
So aspiration being an inkling, not a getting. You don't get classical music before you get classical music.
That's right.
You have an inkling that you should be getting classical music.
You have a hint.
And that brings us
a sense of meaningfulness or something in that direction. Yeah,
and
that's drawing you.
And that brings us into aspirational rationality. So we're merging this irrational transframing
capacity that we have
into an aspirational
trajectory.
rationality,
Yes.
a very rational aspiration. There's a reason for it.
Yes.
You may not know yet. You may not know the reason why you feel like you need to get classical music, but once you get it, you get it.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Something like that. I think that's
Yes.
what I'm getting
that's
out
what
of
he's
it.
I think that's what he's getting at. That's right. Very, very cool.
Oh man, dude. Like
This stuff will really stretch you if you really
I'm gonna go
take it
go
on,
back
you
through
know.
like this next year. I'm gonna go back through this and do an in-depth.
right. I
Meaning
know
I'm
because
gonna
I know
get
there's
rid of
so
all
much.
these notes and rewrite
There's
them
so
because these
much
are-
more that can be glued together in the neural networks that we've been mapping out.
Hey, we've got three
Beautiful.
more after this. We've done
Actually,
Sloka.
2 more, right?
No, I
this
think-
is episode 48, and then we got 49 and 50.
No, but it goes to 51 because the first one's introduction. So it's actually a 51 part series in the.
Is there a 51?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I do see Solving the Meaning Crisis lecture series here.
No, yeah. So I think what's going on is
that's coming.
either way, we're a few away, but I think it's 51 because the
Here's-
first one was just introduction. I've
Here's
been
the
following
video.
the playlist.
Right. Okay. So here's a
so-
video on that I was telling you about earlier with the Orthodox ministers on emergence and emanation. John Vervaeke. That might be fun to cover.
Yeah, interestingly enough, like John Vervaeke being a non-theist, not necessarily an atheist, what he's doing is very similar to what I'm observing that the Orthodox Church, what they do.
Yeah. So he might be open to the idea of God. He just doesn't believe in any one God.
Well, at this, he's a scientist, so
Yeah.
I don't blame him.
So he's not an atheist. He's
But nor does he ever deny either. So
that's
you know,
right.
he's
He
not,
is very careful there.
he's not doing what the more conservative.
But he doesn't want to get into a fundamentalist,
theological
literalistic,
people- well,
propositional argument here. He's trying to do something wholly
never
different.
shaking his fist at God.
That's
because
right.
there's no point in what he's doing. To
Or the
shake his
sacred, a
fist
sense
at
of the sacred.
God.
That's right. He sees the value in a sense of the
Well,
sacred
he's looking at
and the aspirational goal of self-transcendence
Yeah, he's looking at what are we trying to do.
with religion, with religio. Yeah.
Which like I can respect. Like that's kind of what scientists need to do. Is like
Are we just
'cause-
trying to argue over our ideas and proclaim our beliefs, or are we trying to aspire to something within ourselves, a higher relationship with reality, with the source of this reality, and become more loving and responsible and able beings?
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah. Are we trying to follow a way of being, or are we just trying to say, this is what I believe, and that's good enough?
Well,
Because that seems to kind of be the mode that we really have gotten stuck in.
No, it's from what I've realized, most of the times when people claim make the claim that this is what I believe, they don't even know what they believe, and it's a lazy way of just passing the buck of responsibility off to the lump of those who say, I believe such
So
and
and
such.
so, yeah.
You know,
Because it seems right to us. We want to be seen as on the side of right.
Or,
we don't want to be
well, like
kicked out of our group.
I think I
know.
mentioned this when we were heading up to band practice earlier in the week, but sloth and how dangerous sloth is because it's like, well, I believe it, so I don't have to look any further.
Yeah.
You know, I'm lazy. It's the laziness. I don't have to look any further. I don't need to do that. I got it.
That's
I
right.
believe
Yeah,
it. I
yeah,
can make the proclamation, and that's fine. Right?
yeah. And that's actually finally an IKEA form of an argument too. You
Well-
know, that's a victory kind of argument without even using any kind of.
Well, it's the victory by turning over the table.
Rationality,
And just
it's
saying,
just-
whatever. Throwing the monopoly.
Yeah, I'm already
board.
done. I've already looked at that.
Yeah, whatever. You
I've
know.
already figured that out, and I
don't
already
have to-
understand that.
I don't
and
have to play
whatever
chess
you
with
say
you.
is.
I'm better
yeah,
than Yeah.
I don't even need to consider your ideas.
Yeah, that's sloth.
That's a way of ending an argument.
I don't
without
have
even-
to even consider my ideas because I've made the proclamation. That is sloth. That's why
It's a mental sloth. Mental
that's why we need
laziness.
the participatory, subjective aspect of our experience. Is so it's not just I'm proclaiming this. It's like, no, I'm not proclaiming it and I'm done. It's every day I'm going through this. I'm experiencing this. I'm continuing through, and it still seems like it's right to me. And then when you work with somebody else that has a counter idea, ultimately you should be refining what is right to me as you're doing it. That takes work. That's the opposite of sloth.
Yes. A willingness to subject your own beliefs to interpretation and reevaluation.
And take the energy to hold down wrath or
To
envy.
consider, yeah.
And keep it.
Yeah, to drop your conditionality, become
yeah,
more
yeah.
unconditional, to be able to consider someone else's point of view.
The 7 deadly sins is really deep, and it's not just a religious Christian thing. Like, if you really look into them, you see how much time and effort people have taken to identifying these tendencies of human nature that keep us from being the optimized being that we should be. You know, it's really interesting. You know, like humans, we've taken a long time to try to figure this out, and we're not perfect, no, but we've really taken a long time, and it's worth rejecting sloth.
We've done some good work. Yeah.
To put the work in and rejecting the envy of other people. Oh, I just want what they
The
have.
jealousy.
Well, if you want that, put your nose down and work through it. You know, I think, personally, I think sloth is the deadliest of the sins because it keeps you from keeping wrath in check, lust in check, envy in check, you know, all the rest in check.
Yes.
So
You need an aspirational, loving motivation.
aspiration is
Yeah,
a good
a loving motivation too.
It is a good
to transcend
partner
these things.
to
Yeah.
have.
You need that to
Yeah.
develop that willpower to even
Sure,
be able to overcome it. Yeah.
Yeah. And you could say that's almost like when somebody says, "Oh, I feel spoken to by some outside force that made me get my life together." That's aspiration. Whether it's angel, divine double, something is like just your partners in your head, whatever you want to call it. That, you know. So when we say angel, we're talking about the divine double, and when we're talking about the divine double, we're talking about the
Your
greatest version of yourself
Yes.
and the aspiration that grabs you and tries to
Your quote
draw
unquote
you into
angelic
that.
potential.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
I'll have to think on that because like I haven't seen like these past 10 episodes. I haven't seen any of, so it's kind of going off the cuff. So now like that we've gone through this, it'd be nice to listen to again and start to pick out these things and then think of, you know, okay, when they say, you know, like guardian angel or when the reference to angel, like keeping this idea of the divine double for something, not just for myself, but the other angels that aren't the better portions of myself. What is that? What does that mean?
What does that
How does that
represent?
connect
Yeah.
down to here?
And look at that from the imaginal perspective.
Yeah, opposed to the imaginary.
To help the symbol and what the symbol points to be in dialogue. In that deeper dialogue.
Yeah, and in a way that is in the spirit of the logos.
Yes, and exactly that is in a communion with the logos. So we are questing into this question rather than trying to acquire an answer. We are questing into an aspirational process.
Yeah. Oh boy, it's been fun. It's been good. Looking forward to
This was a good one.
next season's stuff. Even though we're not quite finished with this season's, but next season should be really good. Because now we can apply what we've learned here and go out and look at other smart wise guys and what they have to say. And
That's
you know,
right. Yeah.
we're in on the
We can start
conversation
looking,
now.
we can start digging into some of the more controversial subject matter, the things that are going on in the world right now through this lens. It's going to be very, very helpful.
Be a lot better than just me like grinding my teeth while I'm drinking my coffee in the morning and
Well,
reading
now we have
news.
a strong, healthy firewall to
Yeah.
BS and self-deception that we've begun building within ourselves. And the practice of going through this entire series has required a lot of discipline, a lot of effort, a lot of inquiry and willingness to challenge our own conceptions of ideas. It's actually felt really healthy, this entire process. I love how Vervaeke has approached the challenge of how we may awaken from the meaning crisis.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
Well, we're lucky to be in the process of awakening
Right. Yes.
out of this
Yes.
and into this meaning crisis. Because first you must awaken into, and then we'll work together to awaken out of.
Amen. May we never consider ourselves done and be so certain as to think ourselves woke on any subject. May we always be awakening.
Awakening, never awoke.
Right.
Awake,
Yeah. Never done.
not woke.
Constantly. There's infinite room for us to grow out there, so we can ever awaken. And I love that idea.
Well,
I
life
love
would-
that there is no end to the potential that we may reach. You know, there is no cap to our
How
ultimate
bo- how
enlightenment.
boring
There's just
and-
infinite room to grow.
How boring and hellish would life be if there was a limit, particularly a limit that we could see?
Right.
And they're like, oh, they were done. We'll wear robes and sit on thrones.
Right.
Sounds like hell to me.
No.
The thrones
life
that you're
isn't
showing
static.
me look uncomfortable
Yeah.
in those robes. Are they cotton or are they polyester?
Yeah. Right.
Oh boy.
Yeah. This world's never been static. It never will be. It's in a constant state of flux and constant change. And
And you know what? I am so thankful
may we always aspire to.
that I exist in a universe that's, even though it's a churn sometimes, really continues to go and make something of itself. And I can be
Yes.
a part of that making something of itself.
And intrinsically, yes. a part
Outside
of
of
it,
God
yes.
or anything else, the universe is something that is making something of itself, and you get to play a part of it. So whether you're atheistic, non-theistic, any theistic you want, realize that you're playing a part of something grander than yourself, making
greatest-
itself.
The greatest story ever written.
The
is-
greatest story ever that's being
We're all
written,
co-writers
you know?
and co-creators in the greatest play that's ever been performed.
And even if you don't get out, you don't got too many friends and you're a hermit, you're still participating. There's no way out of that.
No.
So I feel blessed for it. Most of the time
We're all
frankly.
receiving from and contributing something to reality.
Yep. And if you're feeling bogged down by it, when the moments that make you feel it and really feel like it's worthwhile, lean into them.
That's right. When you water a plant or even just appreciate a plant, and I say plant because maybe there's no people around, you are in direct contact with the great mystery.
Yeah.
And we may have reverence and a great sense of wonder for that great mystery that we are dwelling within, and for the mystery of beingness that we experience life through. We can turn that being, that sense of being, in upon itself, to investigate itself, to inquire with wonder, a playful, imaginative sort of wonder into itself.
Yeah.
That's it. And then we're in participatory relation with.
We are like the rose.
We are the rose.
We are the
become
dirt,
rose.
and we
Yeah.
are the bloom, and we are the person that is appreciating the bloom, that then becomes the dirt again because that person probably picked the bloom and now it's dying, or
And we
it's
can
reached its time.
see from that again. Yeah. Yeah. We can be from there again.
Constantly going and going. Never tiring. We may tire, but the process doesn't. That's why there's so many iterations of us to continue the process.
Emergence is ever ongoing. Yeah. Never tires, never ends.
Yeah.
All right, fam. This has been beautiful. Thank you all so much for joining us. Make sure that you go over to Vervaeke's channel and hit the like and subscribe. And if you are enjoying what we're doing here, definitely make sure you smash that like and subscribe here as well. Throw it on your comments, help feed that algorithm, and share with your friends and family who you think may be interested as well. Stay tuned for what comes after the Awakening series. We've only got 2 or 3 more episodes to go here. I was just looking to see if there actually is a 51. I see 50. There's a review that someone else did. Hey, Digital Gnosis.
It might be
cool.
50, but I'm using the whatever playlist that's on there that includes
That's right.
the intro.
Yeah.
So
We've done the number 0 intro, I think. Or no, there's episode 1 intro.
yeah.
Here it is, 51 lectures. We're looking at it right now just to.
Yeah, sorry, it's hard to keep track of. It's been 50 hours, almost 50 hours, which is a standard good work week, but still spread out.
It does end on 51. It says here.
Yeah, I think it's 51
Or 50. I'm sorry.
Oh,
No,
50.
50. Yeah, right here. Last episode is 50. It's on Tillich and Barfield.
Yes, that's the last episode. Then hey, we're closer than I thought.
Yep. Next episode is Corbin and Young. Yep. Then Tillich and Barfield, and then he goes into another series that's attached in this playlist.
Yeah, but
This is somebody else's playlist. It looks like.
Yeah.
But there's some great conversations here. I see one with Zachary Stein. He works in education.
I think
He's amazing.
I
He's a
think we
great
only
mind.
have 2 left. I'm just
Yeah, no, you're right.
I'm not
do only.
technology savvy, so you'll have to forgive me. I
That's
don't know how
okay.
this
Yeah,
stuff
we have
works.
2 left.
Sweet. Well, hey, 2 left, and then we're going to take a little bit of a break to get the studio set up,
Yeah.
put things together.
I'm going to
Maybe
reach out to some people connected to John. Maybe we'll bring them on the show. Maybe John himself will come on at some point as well.
yeah. So figuring all that out so we can get a better quality of presentation.
Absolutely.
With what we're doing now, we're getting better accuracy to the material we're talking about through learning this, and then, well, we are not the experts.
No, we're just students of life here along with
So-
all of you, inviting you along for the ride. And we are very grateful for all of you that have joined us here. Even if you've only experienced 2 minutes of this, you pressed the button, your aspiration took you here, and we absolutely celebrate and encourage that. So thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode of Actuali Podcast and Meaning Making 101. We will see you next Wednesday, potentially. If not the Wednesday after that, it'll be 7 p.e.s.t. as always here on YouTube, on Twitch, and on Facebook. You can also always listen through the entire full episodes on Actuali Podcasts through Spotify, Google, Apple, all the places. So make sure that you throw a rating down for us, like and subscribe wherever you can, guys. It helps so much. Once again, love you all. Thank you so much for tuning in. I've been Chris.
I've been DJ.
And we'll see you next time.